and it's so important. This book is so important on so many levels because a memoir is just talking about our happy or sad or mad or glad, you know, just what happens. And some families get more than others, but if we don't talk about all of it, what happens is it stays stuck inside of us, and it can really make it keeps me in business because I'm a psychotherapist. But you know, I'd like to work myself out of a job, and I think if more people were brave like Meg and really, you know, got her whole family behind this and really worked through the whole family from the time they were born until today, they just all chipped in on this book. And I'd like to start off with the personal part first,
Sure.
Meg, if that's okay.
Yep.
And you know, what makes someone brave enough to write a book like this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for that great introduction, and I'm so happy to be here. I'm so just heartened by people that I meet, you know, along the way. But it's especially meaningful for me to be here with Shotsi. So not only are we both wearing gold shoes, it's the Wilmette.
That's very important.
The Wilmette, the Greenwood Avenue Wilmette girl look. But one of the most tender memories I have of growing up is listening to my mom talking to Shotsi's mom. So they were next door neighbor ladies, you know, in that time when ladies were having babies right and left and could not even catch their breath. And both of our mothers were quite overwhelmed by that. I mean, they loved us and they were excited to have us, but they were also overwhelmed. So Shotsi's mom's name was Shari, and my mom was Jean. And Shari and Jean, I think, had their own little support group. They were just like a mini support group. And I wrote about this a little bit in the book, about how I would hear my mom on Sunday afternoons talking on the phone to Shotsi's mom, Shari, and very tenderly. And it was just, I could only hear my mom's end of the conversation, but it was she would just say, "Oh, I know." And so it was just, that was very informative to me about the need for community and the need for us to be there for each other. And so it was really in that spirit that I wanted to write this book, to bring people into the very intimate details of what it's like in a family with a lot of mental illness, and in a time when we didn't have a language for it, we didn't know how to talk about it. So when you asked me about, you know, what gave me the courage to write it, it was, I think I was angry. You know, I was outraged at how people with mental illness are treated in this country, well, in the world. But I saw it as a daughter and a sister, and then later I went on to a career as a newspaper reporter. I worked for 40 years as a reporter, and I was lucky to work in a newspaper the last 35 years, where it was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And the editor there had a real soft spot in his heart for stories about people struggling with mental illness. He had his best friend from high school died by suicide, and he was heartbroken. So George Stanley is his name, and George gave me all this leeway to travel all over the country and talk to people and write stories and to ask two questions. You know, why are people with mental illness treated better? Why is there so much discrimination? And then what can we do to help them? So it was really anger that gave me the steam. And then as for the courage, I mean, I just felt like you're living with the ravages or the consequences of mental illness in your family that's not treated anyway. You might as well talk about it.
Well, I just want to interrupt you for a minute, because when I asked you, you know, what gave you the courage, you know, when we and anger is really a great feeling. Don't do feeling words here, because we want to do something about it.
Right.
You know,
It's a good motivator.
it's a really good motivator. And you know, your pen. It sounds like your pen was going to war with the
Right, yeah.
mental health system in the
Right.
United States.
Yeah. So, you know, I mean, history is replete with journalists who have taken on causes, you know, muckrakers and people, journalists challenging institutions. And really, I felt like that's what I was doing. In Milwaukee, I did a number of stories about the god-awful places where people with serious mental illness were living. In the old days, a lot of them would have been in these horrible asylums, and nobody's wanting a return to those days, but the way that they're being treated now is really not much better. It's not better. They're being abandoned on the streets. They're homeless. They're in jails and prisons, and so that got me very angry. And yeah, and that's what would keep me feisty, cranking out these stories. So after 25 years or something of these stories, I was exhausted, and I wasn't taking very good care of myself. And I was thinking about my mom and how she suffered, and my sister and brother who died, and how they didn't get the help they needed. And it was really overwhelming. And anyway, I ended up just thinking, the hell with it. My journalism is only taking me so far. To really tell the story in the most impactful way, I have to turn the reporter's notebook around and on myself, and write about my family the same way I would write about an investigative project. So that's what I did.
And so, what was your first step
Yeah.
in
Woo.
getting that
Well,
accomplished?
so I had so many false starts. You know, I had this great idea to write this book, but I was still a little too chicken to really tell so I thought, well, I'll do it as a fiction. But I'm a reporter. I don't know how to not tell the truth, you know? So, I mean, we're trained to be accurate and to not say anything that you don't know to be absolutely true. So my first couple of drafts of this as a fiction, the protagonist's name was Maggie. That's not much of a stretch. My sister Patty became Patsy. Billy was Will. So then finally I was like, you know what? Jake was Jackie. Like, nobody was going to believe this anyway. So I might as well just write it the way it really happened. But in order to do that, I needed buy-in from my brothers and sisters, because it's their family too, and it was their trauma too. So I didn't want to bully them into it, but I really, really, really wanted to write the book. So I was sensitive enough to not ask them all in a group setting and make it be like peer pressure. But so I went to each of them individually and said, you know, what do you think? So this was not a small ask. You know, I am unearthing, or I'm revealing stuff that was very painful. You know, not just you know, my brother and sister's suicides, but my mother's suicide attempts plural, the humiliating criminal trial of my brother Danny, and which was rooted in anti-Semitism, and that was 45 years ago. Like, who wants to go back and relive all of that? But you couldn't tell the story of my family without including that. So anyway, when I went to them, I knew it was a big ask. But I also knew that they're very generous people. And, bonus, we're old. So, you know, we don't have that much to lose. You know, like, we've lived our lives. And we also know that the shame of living with mental illness is not getting anybody anywhere good. We need to be able to talk about this and just acknowledge it for what it is. So, hooray, hooray. They all said, let's go for it. So anyway, just a quick note about the process of this. So I knew, again, as an investigative reporter, that I needed to get the material So I wanted the police records from the days that Nancy and Danny died, because these were things that we didn't talk about, but I was so curious about them, and I needed to know for my own peace of mind, and not in a macabre way, but just in a way that I needed to understand it fully. So I got the police records, I got their medical files as best as I could. I interviewed their friends and their teachers and people who, would have inside information that I might not have known back in the day. And then other manner of public records. And I even found, I'm so proud of this, I found our old babysitter from 1961 to 1963. And she almost fainted. She lives in Florida. She's in a retirement community now, of course. And I called her, I said, "Hi, Linda, it's Meg Kissinger. Long time no see." Well, long time was like literally 60 years. And I said, "I'm writing this book." Anyway, when she said, she didn't skip a beat, and she said, "Meg, if you were sitting in front of me right now, I could," she said, if I had a pen and paper in my hand right now, I could draw all of your faces. She said, "The 2 years that I spent with your family were 2 of the happiest years of my life." And I was like, wow. Anyway, so it took a little detective work to put this story together, and I collected it all in a Google Doc and said to my brothers and sisters, "It's family archival material. If you want to look at it, have at it, but don't feel like you have to. But the one thing I'm going to ask you to do is read the book before I send it to the editor, because if there's anything in there that that's going to hurt you or you can't live with, I don't want to put it in. I want you to be comfortable with what we have." That said, I didn't want to write like a memoir by committee. I didn't want this to be like, sanded down and so overwhelming with everybody's point of view in there. So it was a tricky undertaking, but they were great. The only objection that I got, and there's some heavy duty stuff in there. There's my sister's abortion that I never knew about. There's another sister who checked herself into a psych hospital that I never knew about. There's a lot of pretty intense stuff that is talked about in this book. But it was the youngest sister, Molly, who's a little bit of a hippie. And she said, "Do you have to say that I used to smoke pot all the time in high school?" And I'm like, "Yeah, girl, I do. Because we need to show that you were struggling." And she's like, "Okay." So that was the only flack I got.
So after you did the hurdle of your brothers and sisters and you started putting the book together, and I got a call from you, and you asked me neighborhood stuff and stuff about my mom, and then all of a sudden it became apparent that their special friendship, because you were talking about it, was because they both used to go to the psych hospital, and we're not sure if they didn't go together sometimes.
Yeah. Right.
Because they both had postpartum and they had other types of things. But, Meg was, I was in my family, Meg was in her family, and I thought her family was, pretty normal, except for the yelling and the screaming, but they, there are 8 kids next door, and so, that has to happen.
Our houses were not that close together. You could still hear the screaming. Yeah, there was a lot. Yeah.
So, Meg, you did mention to me about your stint at Columbia.
Yeah.
And that when you were at Columbia, that's when you decided to do the memoir because you took a class.
Yes.
And after you told me that, I was so intrigued because you pulled it off.
Right.
And why don't you share about the,
Sure.
like really what is the reason why, what's the reason why someone's writing a memoir?
Yeah.
What did you learn in that class?
Right. I did learn, I learned a couple things by I took 2 classes. Well, first of all, I was minding my own business, and when up in Milwaukee, when I got a phone call from Columbia University in New York City asking me if I wanted to come and work as a visiting professor teaching investigative reporting. And I was like, is this April Fool's Day or like what's going on here? Because I just didn't expect to get a call from an Ivy League school. I'm like, have you seen my college transcripts? Anyway, they were like, no, we like the way you report and you can probably teach it. So anyway, off I went to teach at this august institution. That's today is under fire. I don't know if anybody's seen the news. They're arresting students on campus right now. But anyway, it's a hot mess. I digress. So at Columbia, I took 2 classes. One was on how to write a book proposal, and the other was how to write a memoir. And the great piece of advice, I got several great pieces of advice, but 2 in particular that stuck with me, and the first of which is, the book is not about you. Your memoir is not about you. And I was like, what? Excuse me, it most certainly is. But no, the professor said, no offense, but nobody knows who you are, and they're not going to buy a book just by, who is this Meg Kissinger? They don't care. What readers want in a book is they want to know something about themselves. They want to learn something, and they learn something through something that you went through. So she said, come up with a algorithm. So it's what did you learn because of what you went through. So what I learned is that shame is toxic, and shame can kill you. And I learned that because of growing up in a family with mental illness that we didn't have the language to discuss. So that was a great piece of advice. The second one was everything can't go in the book. You have to be pretty judicious. It's got to serve that through line. So I always knew writing the book that this is a book about how shame is toxic. So the funny story that I had written about when I got drunk on beer and drove my parents' car down the patio steps at our grade school. That didn't make the book. I originally wrote it and I included that, and my editor said, this is a book about mental illness. So, yeah, I mean, maybe I was self-medicating with that beer, I don't know. But anyway, you have to be careful about what you're, judicious about what you put in. So that's, it was very helpful to have direction on how to write the book.
So I'm going to turn some of your book towards the Catholic Church.
Sure.
And I think, if you're not Catholic, there must be some organization that gave you a roadmap in your life that said you're either going to go to hell or you're going to make it.
Yeah.
But in your book, you bring it up a lot, and maybe
Sure.
orient
Yeah.
our St. Francis and all
Sure.
of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so where Shotsi and I grew up, so we grew up in East Wilmette, and our block, I'll just talk about the 1200 block of Greenwood Avenue, was lousy with kids. There must have been 60 kids on that block.
Yeah, one
Well,
block.
the Closey family had 10. We had 8. So right there it's 18. That's just 2 of the houses. And probably not dissimilar to maybe neighborhoods that some of you grew up in. But this was, again, the 1960s and 70s. And the parish was our life. That was the epicenter for everything. So we went to school there Monday through Friday. They had often on Saturday nights they would have some whoop-de-doo of another, at church, and there was lots of, booze was flowing and good time was had by all. And then of course on Sunday, boom, there you were at Mass. No matter how hungover your parents were, you were at 9:15 Mass wearing like matching dresses and stuff. So the parish was everything, and the Catholic Church that was our authority. And I can remember, Shotsi, remember when the priest would come in the room, you knelt. I mean, you came out of your desks and you fell to the floor on your knees. And the nuns would come through with their clickers, and there was, there's a special place in hell for Sister Mary David, who, the 3rd grade nun who made me sit in the waste paper basket 9 times. But anyway, but and everybody's made fun of the Catholic Church, it's a lot of it is not funny at all because of horrible sex abuse and the cover-up and the bigotry and the misogyny, and there's a lot of bad things that the Catholic Church has done and stands for, I happen to still be Catholic, and I am, and I go to Mass all the time. I pray every day, and that seems like so, I don't know, it's such a paradox, but I need it. The Catholic Church that I love, I'm kind of getting off of your topic here, but I'm just going to say
You are.
that
That's okay.
that I've made a conscious decision to stick with it. I've tried to quit many times, but I feel like it grounds me and it gives me direction. But to the point of the book and the Catholic Church, what was quite formative was on the night that my sister Nancy died in 1978, and Nancy had had many suicide attempts, many. So how many ambulances did you see in front of our house over the years?
Yeah, at least 6 or
Yeah.
7. Yeah.
So on the night that she did die, my dad gathered us all into the living room and said, if anybody asks, this was an accident. And, we thought, like, are you kidding, dude? Like, no one's going to buy that. But one of the big reasons he said that, he was embarrassed, of course, but he was also afraid. And he was very afraid that the Catholic Church would not allow my sister to have a funeral. And neither would they allow her to be buried in our family's cemetery plot, in the Catholic cemetery. So those were legitimate fears on his part. And that makes me very angry when I think about that. As it turned out, she had a full-on Mass. There were 3 priests up on the altar. Many years later, when my brother Danny died, also by suicide, the priest was over to the house like a rocket. And anyway, so the church, I think did a lot that was harmful to our family in terms of giving us the comfort that we needed at that time.
Right.
But in subsequent years, it's also provided a safe haven and a place of comfort for me anyway.
Right. And I think also you mentioned